Welcome back, I'm Rachel, and in this video we're going to go over the structure of the lacrimal bone. Firstly, where is this bone located? The lacrimal bone is a paired bone located in the middle of the anterior portion of the skull in the eye sockets. If we take a closer look at the frontal view of the skull, we can see highlighted in red small portions of the lacrimal bones in each of the eye sockets. If we take an even closer look, but instead of a portion of the lateral side of the skull, we can see highlighted in red the lacrimal bone. Now we're going to take a look at the different landmarks and features of the lacrimal bone. Here we have the lateral view and the medial view of the right lacrimal bone. This bone consists of two surfaces. The first of these surfaces is the lateral surface. This surface is also known as the orbital surface. This surface is divided into two by a vertical ridge known as the posterior lacrimal crest. The anterior part of this surface has a longitudinal groove on it known as the lacrimal sulcus or the lacrimal groove. The anterior margin of the lacrimal groove is for articulation with the frontal process of the maxilla bone, which completes the lacrimal fossa. The lacrimal fossa is a depression in the bone where the lacrimal gland and nasolacrimal duct sit. The posterior part of the surface is smooth and forms a portion of the medial wall of the orbit. This part also extends along with part of the crest into a hook-like shaped projection known as the lacrimal hamulus. The hamulus is for articulation with the lacrimal tubercle of the maxilla bone. The second surface is the medial surface. This surface is also known as the nasal surface as it faces the nasal cavity. This surface has a furrow along it which corresponds to the lacrimal crest on the lateral surface. The anterior side of this surface forms part of the middle meatus of the nose. The posterior side of the surface articulates with the ethmoid bone and completes some of the anterior ethmoidal cells. This bone also has four borders. The first of these borders is the anterior border, which forms the border between this bone and the frontal process of the maxilla bone. The second of these borders is the posterior border, which forms the border between this bone and part of the ethmoid bone. The third of these borders is the superior border, which forms the border between this bone and the frontal bone. The fourth and final border is the inferior border. This border is divided by the inferior part of the lacrimal crest. The posterior part of this border forms the border between this bone and the orbital plate of the maxilla bone. The anterior part of this border extends downwards, forming what is known as the descending process. The anterior part of this border forms the border between this bone and the inferior nasal concha bone. Let's now take a closer look at the articulations this bone has with other bones. This bone articulates with four other bones. The first of these articulations is with the frontal bone. The superior border of the lacrimal bone articulates with the lateral region of the nasal notch of the frontal bone. This articulation forms the frontolacrimal suture. The second articulation is with the ethmoid bone. The posterior border of the lacrimal bone articulates with the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. In addition, the posterior side of the medial surface of the lacrimal bone articulates with the ethmoid bone and completes some of the anterior ethmoidal cells. These articulations form the ethmoidolacrimal suture. The third articulation is with the maxilla bone. The inferior border of the lacrimal bone articulates with the orbital surface of the maxilla bone. The margin of the lacrimal groove of this bone articulates with the frontal process of the maxilla bone. In addition, the hamulus of this bone articulates with the lacrimal tubercle of the maxilla bone. These articulations form the lacrimomaxillary suture. The fourth and final articulation is with the inferior nasal concha bone. The anterior part of the inferior border of the lacrimal bone articulates with the lacrimal process of the inferior nasal concha bone. This forms the lacrimoconchal suture. What about the muscles that attach to this bone? One muscle attaches onto this bone. The lacrimal part of the orbicularis oculi muscle originates from the smooth region of the medial orbital surface of this bone. And that concludes this video on the structure of the lacrimal bone. I hope you found it helpful.
Thank you for watching. If you want to support this channel, please subscribe and check out more of my videos.